Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
China's leadership meeting calls for stronger confidence in economic work. The UAE has announced its withdrawal from global oil producers group, OPEC. A surge in coffee consumption highlights growing opportunities in China's agricultural imports. Welcome to World Today, a news program with a different perspective. I'm Anna in Beijing. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. Our top story, a key meeting of the highest executive and decision-making authority of the Communist Party of China is calling for stronger confidence and carry out economic work with greater effort. The meeting, chaired by General Secretary Xi Jinping, called for strengthening endogenous drivers, improving the domestic and international circulations, and getting the new five-year plan off to a good start. He also urged efforts to stimulate consumption upgrading, accelerating the building of a modern industrial system, and fully implement the AI Plus initiative. So for more on this, joining us on the line is Professor Chu Qiang, fellow of the Belt and Road Research Center at Minzu University of China. Thanks for joining us, Professor.
Thank you very much.
Professor, the meeting said the economy is on a steady upward track, but the foundation still needs to be strengthened. Considering all the external pressures like the U.S.-Iran conflict pushing energy prices up and the trade frictions heating up, China's 5% GDP growth in the first quarter is pretty impressive, right? So where do you see the economy's weak spots right now, and how should we understand economic confidence amid such a challenging environment?
Well, I think currently Chinese economy is absolutely in a shifting gear, stage where we see the yin and yang are happening at the same time. I think in the bright side, if you take a look at the export and also the structure of the export, is absolutely phenomenal, especially against the current uncertainty you mentioned. 15% of the export increase and double-digit growth in the mechanics and the high technology products. These are actually changing the whole game, changing the whole story. I mean, made in China is not the word for, shabby and low quality product anymore. It already been representing the highest quality and high technology products of the whole world. So I think that is, what China has been actually seeing lots of the great result of the policies and the people's effort on this kind of the shifting gears of the economic structures. But on the other hand, we really need to take a look at, the cold side of our economy, especially our domestic demand. We've been seeing that, the private sector's investment are still in a low gear, and also we'll be seeing the housing market are still, in the low position. The expectation, is getting better in the Q1, but we need to see not only happens. We hope it's not only happening in Beijing and Shanghai, in the bigger cities. Yes, the housing market has been, rebounded, but still there are 70 cities are still seeing the slowing down, continuing in the housing market, and also even though we've been seeing the CPI and the PPI are finally getting better and better. But I think the whole situation still need to be preserved. The momentum need to be preserved because current rebound of the PPI and the CPI are basically being triggered by the higher rising oil prices and the gas prices. Mm-hmm. And also more than that, we've been seeing uncertainties going on. And many wars outside China. Well, even though we still stay safe, but international supply chain can be still disrupted. So I think we need to be very, very careful. We need to be playing very balanced, and also we need to, save all kinds of the policy tools in the future for more of the uncertainty to come.
Professor, building on that, with Middle East tensions pushing global oil prices up, China's economy in this year so far appears to have been less affected than many other major economies such as Europe and Japan. Some say this is because of China's long-term energy strategy, more renewables, less reliance on oil, and even an energy self-sufficiency rate close to 85%. So how do you see the link between energy security and economic resilience? And can this be seen as a key buffer against external uncertainty today?
Well, I think I can quote one of America media's comment on China. They say if there is one country who is resilient and winning in this current international backdrop, that it's China. Yes, I think 15 years ago when we started this long march towards energy self-reliance and very much on a green power, I think nobody understand why we're trying to rely on this low efficient, well, 15 years ago, low efficient and expensive green energy. But until today, when you see this, quick falling of the green energy prices and, fast rising of its efficiency, you fully understand why our policymakers are, determined to go along this very important route of the energy supply. Currently, yes, as you mentioned, about half of our Chinese energy mix are coming from the electricity, and most of them coming from the renewable energies, which it's very very affordable, and the marginal cost is getting lower and lower when you build more and you use more. So it's not only fitting into the AI's development, but also when you see this kind of outside impact coming from the Hormuz Strait, we actually can stand still. For example, I'm driving an EV, so the current oil fuzz never affected me. Actually, I didn't go to the gas station for a very long time, so I don't know what's going on outside there. So for all China, if you travel around China, you will see this kind of self-sufficiency is actually providing not only a lower price, but it giving people a signal that we got the situation in control. We can actually make sure that a whole supply chain are functioning with affordable price. So I think this is very important. But of course, we cannot be just so self-satisfied with everything, because we still have some structural reliance on outside oil and gas, for example, like natural gas, and also not mentioning about the raw materials on the fertilizers. We cannot create everything by ourselves. So we still need to open up even wider and cooperate with our international partner. But I think one good thing is that our energy reliance and sufficiency is not only by doing everything on ourselves, but by having this peaceful and a good relation partnership with all the global South nations. That's the reason why they never targeted China as a hostility, target. They always see China as a peaceful partner. No matter what bad thing happens, nobody are seeing China as the target, but they would rather to cooperate with China even further, even more. So I think that is the golden value the Chinese supply chain can provide it to the international investors in the future.
And that's a great point. To delve into that point, the meeting talked about using the certainty of a high quality development to deal with all kinds of uncertainty. So in today's world of rising geopolitical risks and protectionism, what do you think are China's biggest source of stability or certainty, not only for the country's own development, also for other partners around the world?
I think this should be actually coming from many aspects. I think many of them for already understand that through the previous several years international turbulence. Number one, I think the size of the Chinese market. We have 1.4 billion population and more than 400 millions of middle income class, with the number are still keep on rising. So this is actually one of the largest and also slash effective market of the whole world. When you combine America, Canada, European Union, Australia, and New Zealand, all these developed nations together, their population size is only 1.1 billion. And, even though they have higher consumption power, but still China is just coming and rising up really quickly. And also we have a unified market in the making, and this transaction cost is getting lower and lower. So this bonus is actually one of the most promising future in the whole world in the next 10 years to come, especially when we made up the, the 15th five-year plan, and you can see the whole narrative in that. And secondly, is about the Chinese comprehensive industrial, system. Our supply chain is very important anchor stone for the whole world. When you see the whole world is at war, everything's getting, messed up. What you don't want to see is China's getting involved, but on the contrary, China actually make sure that things are still being produced, service can be provided, and children can still see their gift on, the holiday table, and people can still buy, their clothes and toy and mechanics, 5G equipment, out of China. to make sure the lifestyle goes on. And thirdly is about technology, trying to have, the technology oriented infrastructures like all kinds of the water supply, Wi-Fi supply, transportation network, and all that, and power supply. All that actually makes sure China is an invisible champion in the international competition and investment. And also letting alone, you're talking about Chinese engineer team, the population bonus, we'll be switching that into technician, bonus. And also, I think the policy, China have this, top-notch policy decision makers. They've been very much dedicated to make sure China stay very open and a peaceful player in the whole world, to be a very efficient, contributor to the world economy. And that is gold, in the whole world, because a major country like China, I think we're the only major country in the whole world, are still not getting involved in any war. And we promise we never want to get into war unless we've been invaded. So I think this kind of a promise, this kind of attitude to stay peaceful and safe, to make sure all of our investment, anyone who invested in China, who are building things in China, stay in safe and a peaceful environment, are so important in current world.
Mm-hmm. Professor, then compared to previous meetings, do you notice any other changes in the way policies are being framed or priorities are being set? If so, what kind of signals do these changes send?
Well, there are many things. For example, we used to say we need to stabilize our growth. Now, I think this time it's being saying we need to stabilize our expectation. I think the central government understand the modern economy is not actually, this is the intuition. The modern economy is actually not based on the fundamentals, but more based on the confidence or the expectations. So this is very important, the shift of the paradigm in the policy making. I think I'm very glad to see that coming. And secondly, I think the top leadership has been mentioning that last year we need to respond to all the kind of the outside turbulence. But this time we're saying we need to set up the agenda. We need to proactively make sure something happens. So this kind of, very proactive attitude are also very important, because that means that top leadership has already been understanding what's going on out there, what we need to do. And with the 15th five-year plan has been clearly, setting up an agenda. So I think we have a playbook right now. So with this a very clear playbook, and I think it's more confident for us to deal with the future by ourselves instead of just being passively respond to this kind of the challenges. And also we mentioned about the networks of infrastructures and technologies. We mentioned further about the new quality productive forces, and also we mentioned about how we should mobilize the social capitals, how we should initiate more of the private sector join in, and that are very important. And also internationally, I think the government in this conference has been mentioning, not like last year, is we're in the trade war with the outside world, but they're saying this kind of the conflict has been mitigated, but more like how can we deal with the common challenges, which means the outside environment actually is turning better for China, like we just mentioned. China, because it's so peaceful. So when the situation is getting worse, no country would like to target China as this rivalry, unless they want to make everything worse and worse. So I think Chinese, the unique position in the market, and also is as a political and also diplomatic partner, endorsed China to be such a very outstanding and advantageous player and partner in the whole world.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Professor, for those insightful analysis. That was Professor Chu Qiang, fellow of Belt and Road Research Center at Minzu University of China. The United Arab Emirates has announced it will withdraw from the global oil producers group, OPEC, and the OPEC Plus alliance starting Friday. UAE said the move reflects its goal of increasing flexibility in using its energy resources, strengthening national development, and reinforcing global market confidence and energy stability. The departure removes one of the group's major producers and is expected to reduce OPEC's influence influence over global oil supply coordination. So to delve into this, joining us on the line is Dr. Zhang Chuchu, Deputy Director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University. Great to have you, Professor Zhang.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, when you saw this news, given all the instability in the Middle East and rising global energy prices, were you surprised? And what do you think is really behind this UAE's decision to step away from OPEC?
Well, actually, I was not particularly surprised, though the timing and abruptness were striking. I would say there are many strategic considerations behind this move. So the United States-Israeli war with Iran has already disrupted the Strait of Hormuz, and that creates an unprecedented supply crunch and price strikes. So currently the Gulf exporters, they are struggling with shipping, storage, backups, and also insurance issues. And also we have to bear in mind that the Gulf countries, including the United Arab Emirates, they largely depend on the oil export. So right now they are facing a shortage of the revenues. And at the same time, the United Arab Emirates has also suffered disproportionately because so far it has absorbed more Iranian projectiles than any other GCC states. So there are a lot of hits on its ports, refineries, airports, economic hubs like Dubai. So the United Arab Emirates officials, they publicly expressed their disappointment at the GCC because it thinks that the GCC lacks collective political and military response. So right now, I think by withdrawing from the OPEC, the United Arab Emirates tries to express its dissatisfaction, and at the same time with its exit from the OPEC, the Emirates has also signaled its dissatisfaction with the cartel's quota framework. So by no longer binding itself by production limits, the Emirates can now ramp up output as it sees fit to capture higher revenues in today's high price environment.
Professor, do you mind elaborate more on this? Because, as you said, this is not really a sudden move, but more like the result of a long-standing tensions between the UAE and OPEC finally coming to the surface. So how big are the differences between the UAE and OPEC's core system? Are there structural contradictions between UAE's long-term national strategy and OPEC's approach?
Right, I think there are the differences, definitely. In fact, I will say the OPEC's traditional model is a cartel style supply management to stabilize or elevate prices through collective quotas. And the Saudi Arabian is always a swing producer, and it has a great discursive power within the OPEC. But the problem is that, in fact, and even in the past, there were a lot of disagreements between different members within the OPEC because, when you stabilize or elevate the prices, different countries have different feelings, and the outcome for different countries are also completely different. For example, for the larger producer of oil, they might want to see a higher price. However, for the smaller countries, they would prefer to have enough exports so as to ensure that they get enough revenues. The United Arab Emirates, it's increasingly operates like a nimble market-oriented player, and always it wants production agility. It wants direct partnerships with international majors, and also the ability to respond unilaterally to demand signals from Asia and emerging energy sectors. So that is a great difference between them. And I think, and that is the deep root cause for this withdrawal at the moment.
Mm-hmm. We know Saudi and the UAE together control over 4 million barrels per day of spare capacity, basically the dual core that stabilizes OPEC. So now with the UAE stepping out, that pillar is effectively cut in half. Some even say this could be the beginning of the end of the OPEC organization. So do you agree with that kind of assessment?
Well, I think such a scenario is possible, but perhaps this kind of judgment is an overstate of the situation, at least in the short term. Right, the United Arab Emirates used to be OPEC's third largest producer, and together with Saudi Arabia, it forms the dual core of meaningful spare capacity. So losing the United Arab Emirates halves that stabilizing pillar, and it drops OPEC's global supply share, that is for sure. And this makes the group structurally more fragile. And also, I would expect that maybe in the future, the OPEC will become more Saudi-centric. And at this moment, I think the OPEC will still survive and also continue coordinating with each other. But its market influence is maybe strongly affected at a time when non-OPEC supply, such as the United States, might keep growing. So I would say this is a serious undermining effect. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that there is going to be an immediate collapse of OPEC.
Mm-hmm. Do you think this could trigger a domino effect? Could other OPEC members follow the UAE's lead?
Well, I think this is possible, and actually it has already happened. Previously, actually Qatar, Ecuador, Indonesia, and Angola, they had all withdrawn from the OPEC. And now we have seen the same thing happen with the United Arab Emirates. So therefore, at this stage, I think smaller and quota-constrained members might watch and see, especially if the United Arab Emirates successfully ramps output and captures market share without immediate retaliation. And also, as you know, if, let's say, the United States-Israeli war with Iran continue like that, and if there is no de-escalation, or let's say if there is an escalation in the short term, then that is going to have a negative impact on the revenue and economic situation in many of the Gulf states. So maybe that is going to have an impact. However, at this stage, many OPEC states, they lack the United Arab Emirates' spare capacity, infrastructure, or geopolitical leverage, so they can still benefit from the OPEC's price umbrella.
Mm-hmm. Professor, it's reported that the UAE can already export oil without going through the Strait of Hormuz. So after it steps outside the OPEC framework, what strategic direction do you think the UAE is likely to pursue next?
I think it means that it's going to get greater production independence and export flexibility. For example, with the Fujairah bypass already operational, the United Arab Emirates can ship crude oil directly to the Indian Ocean without Hormuz exposure for a significant portion of its output. So they expect accelerated output toward full capacity. Also, there might be new long-term contracts, especially with a lot of Asian countries. Also, there might be continued energy diversification in the United Arab Emirates. So in general, I would say the Emirates is trying to control its own destiny in a fragmented, high volatility market.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Professor, for those valuable insights. That was Dr. Zhang Chuchu, Deputy Director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University. More to come, a Pakistani scholar weigh in on Japan's remilitarization moves. Free trade agreement between the European Union and the South American trade bloc, Mercosur, will begin to take effect gradually from May 1st. A surge in coffee consumption highlights growing opportunities in China's agricultural imports. You're listening to World Today. We'll be back after a short break. You've been listening to World Today with me, Anna, in Beijing. China's foreign ministry has called on all peace-loving countries to stay vigilant and firmly oppose Japan's reckless moves of neo-militarism. Spokesperson Lin Jian made the remarks after Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi said she is prepared for a long-term conflict. Takaichi's government has been pushing to rebuild Japan's war machine with a slew of measures, including revising self-defense forces rank titles, some of which revive pre-World War II terminology, lifting a ban on lethal arms exports, and moving closer to establishing a new intelligence apparatus. So for more on this, my colleague Zhou Hongyu spoke with Hassan Dadbud, associate professor with Bahria University in Pakistan.
Now, Japan has this plan to revive pre-World War II military rank terminology within its self-defense forces. From your perspective, is it just a symbolic move, or is this move signaling a shift in Japan's military posture?
Yeah, thank you very much. And, sometimes this symbolism in military affairs often carry significant political meanings. They might appear very simple and very internal, but sometimes they also have the external aspect of this. While it can signal normalization of military identity, bringing terminologies and the governance structure closer to that of conventional armed forces, which are there in the region also and beyond. And also, it can indicate a gradual shift towards a more standardized military posture. And of course, the institutional strengthening. But I think on a strategic signaling part, this is also very important, especially for neighboring countries, because I believe that for neighboring countries, it can be interpreted as part of a broader trajectory towards expanding military capability. And of course, the Japan's security framework, while it still operates under Article 9 of its constitution, but sometimes such signaling may not just have a great impact internally, but also externally, and perhaps can be taken with some concern also. In that respect, while we all understand about Japan's security framework and how it operates, these changes, of course, are viewed carefully and with a lot of caution. We already know that China, because of its great initiative, including the Belt and Road, Global Security Initiative, Global Development Initiative, is talking about a stabilizing aspect in the region. It is talking about non-interference. So when we do just across the neighborhood, when we do things which can jeopardize the trust between countries and bring militarization, I think this will not help any country, especially at this critical hour. So I hope Japan and the government of Japan will understand these aspects and look at them in a more global, peaceful perspective.
Okay. And then how do Japanese actions of remilitarization affect regional trust, particularly among countries that suffered during World War II?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question. And I just highlighted the importance of trust between nations. Because when you want to do trade, when you want to do even tourism, when you want to work with cross-border projects, you need trust. And this is also important, especially with the aspects of those countries that have suffered during World War II, particularly China, South Korea. And of course, these countries, and including other regional countries which are already being impacted by a war which is happening across border, we remain sensitive to changes in such defense postures. While we work on anything internally, we should also look at the impact it can have on external trust and external relationships. Because when you talk of regional trust, it includes the historic sensitivities also. It also includes wartime memories which influence public opinion and political discourse. So while Japan frames its actions as defenses or defensive responses to contemporary threats, of course, this is the journal rhetoric and jargons that are built. We and the other regional countries might look at it with the historic lens. We have already suffered a lot, and therefore we are already living in a security dilemma. In Pakistan, just across border, there is an aspect happening. We are already trying to mediate or reduce the impact of that war. The economies are suffering. People are getting poorer as we speak. So military enhancement by one country can, prompt countermeasures by the others. The others might look at it in a more distrustful manner and potentially increasing regional trends.
Now there are criticism that Japan's moves of remilitarization is a challenge to the post-World War II international order, which was established to prevent the resurgence of militarism and maintain world peace. To what extent do you think Japan's series of remilitarization moves challenge the foundation and core principles of this order?
It's a very important question because, we want to, and including China and some of the regional countries, we want to promote multilateralism. We want to strengthen the post-World War II institutions that were created because of a lot of destruction, a lot of mistrust. So therefore, when we talk of anything that you've just mentioned, we must also remember that the post-World War II order emphasized on demilitarization. It emphasized on collective security, mutual coexistence in one way or the other, and of course, peaceful dispute resolutions. I think they have become the cornerstone of stability in our region, Asia at large. And of course, therefore, it can be interpreted in many ways, but for me, it can be a challenge to those principles that have shaped the post-war rule, the order, because many good things have emerged because of that order. And if we try to jeopardize that and perhaps work on adaptation to a new geopolitical reality, which is based on just the internal aspect of one country while forgetting the overall international legal order and framework, this will never bring peace and prosperity. And I think there has to be discussion around that, not just while we are talking as we are talking, but also at international forums, and there should be dialogue happening, there should be debate happening.
You mentioned that the post-World War II order is the cornerstone for peace and development of the world. And China has always firmly defended this international order and opposed the resurgence of Japanese militarism. So what significance does such stance and efforts have for maintaining peace and stability in Asia and beyond?
Yeah, I think Pakistan has been part of many forums, multilateral forums, where China has provided strength to. And I would like to discuss a little bit about that. For example, SCO. For example, the emerging framework for BRICS. This multilateralism and the discussion that we have from the aspect of security. And let me give you another important point. When SCO started, it mainly started with a platform which was working on issues around security. But as it emerged, as people started sitting across the table, as global leaders, regional leaders, because Asia is an important region now, it contributes to demographically also, it is one of the significant regions, but economically in terms of trade and the volume of trade and what is happening, in terms of import and export, a larger global trade and the order around that trade is important. And when countries and regions and leaderships, they sit together in platform of multilateralism, something good always emerges, I believe. So therefore, these multilateral organizations, especially the post-World War II multilateral organizations, promoting sustainable peace and stability in the 21st century, it is, as I said earlier and I said again, and an experience of SCO as a platform. It's not just about security posture or military posture, but it is a coordinated global effort to confront challenges like climate change, disaster resilience, human security. And in that sense, not just your earlier question of trust is important, strengthening multilateralism and strengthening existing multilateral organizations are important.
That was Hassan Dotbat, Associate Professor with Bahrain University in Pakistan, speaking with my colleague Do Hongyu. This is World Today. We'll be back.
Hello, I'm Yin Liang, Kramer Chair Professor of Economics at Willamette University. In a rapidly changing world, staying informed has never been more important. World Today delivers sharp analysis, global perspectives, and the stories behind the headlines. It is your trusted source to understand what's shaping our world. World Today, bringing the world closer.
You've been listening to World Today. The Mercosur, a European Union free trade agreement, will begin to take effect gradually from May 1st, following 26 years of negotiations. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has signed the deal into force, creating a combined market of around 720 million people. The agreement links the European Union with Mercosur, which includes Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, while Bolivia is in the process of joining the South American trade bloc. Under the agreement, tariffs on more than 90% of bilateral trade will be eliminated over time. For more on this, my colleague Gao Yingshi earlier spoke with Dr. Zhou Mi, Senior Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation.
After 26 years of negotiations, the Mercosur-EU free trade agreement has finally been brought into force by Brazil. So why did it take so long, and what finally broke the deadlock?
Well, we know that South American countries have a really good demand for the integration. So that is why the Mercosur came into force. They want to have the better integrations among these countries. And the four countries, maybe in the past, they also included Venezuela, but now the Venezuela has been excluded from this kind of package. Why they decided to negotiate with EU? I think the problem is that they really want to have a better trade relations with the very important market of EU. So that is the reason why they started to negotiate. But the situations are becoming very complicated in the past 26 years. The different administrations came in and left from these poor countries in South America, but also EU are suffering from a lot of changes. So I think that it takes them such a long time because they haven't decided whether they should do it. Because as for the free trade, some of these countries, especially from the South American countries, they don't like it very much. They still have a lot of worries about the agriculture's impacts, like the import from the European unions, the dairies or beefs or other kind of products that will harm the benefits of these South American countries' benefits or the industries. So these are the worries. While at the other side, I think that is still are kind of reasons why we are looking at the protectionisms of the United States are giving very big pressures for both for EU and for the Mercosur countries. So they have to do something more to have some reaction on this protectionism and still trying to provide a better space for their domestic economies and industries.
The agreement will create a market of 720 million people and remove tariffs on over 90% of trade between the two blocs. So what are the expected economic benefits for both sides?
Well, as for the free trade agreements, normally there will be two effects. The first one is trade transfer effect. That the trade away, maybe they will transfer from one area, one country, one region to another. So that will cause some of changes. I think that trade will also have some relations with employment, with industries and taxes. So all these things will happen according to the new mechanism. But this is just one effect. Another one is a trade creation. Maybe with a better integration, the market do need more input, do need more capacities on certain kind of products that will also create a bigger share of the market. But I don't think that will naturally happen, as time goes on, because this is really our important agreement, but it's also very complicated. So for all the stakeholders, including the enterprises, the governments, they have to do some adaptation to the new agreement. They have to try to make the people, make the enterprises know what is going on and what are the requirements for them to benefit from that. So naturally, I would argue that even some of these enterprises from the South American countries, they will not agree with this agreement. There may be some kind of disputes, with this kind of new agreement. So I hope that both sides can really look at about the free trade, of this agreement, and trying to do more to improve its transparencies and also to have some capacity building for the related stakeholders.
Speaking about this agreement, we've seen that the French President Macron called the EU's decision to push the deal an unpleasant surprise, vowing to defend French farmers. So why has France led the opposition, and what does it tell us about divisions inside the EU?
Well, EU has many members, and all these members are good at different things. Like the Germany is good at manufacturing. Well, French, they are really curious about its agricultures. So, many of the cities like Lyon, they are very important producers of the dairies and some of these agricultural products. So when they are facing the challenges, especially from the Mercosur, one of the main impacts are coming from the dairies products and also from the beef. So, wineries also. So I think that for those producers or farmers in France, they really worry about the possible very cheap products that will have some impacts on their market share in French and also in EU market.
The first phase covers tariff cuts, government procurement, and trade facilitation. So with France's objections now out in the open, what are the main hurdles ahead for implementation?
Well, I think that they are still temporarily, be enforced by EU. So it means that there still needs some process by the Parliament of EU and all the member states. They do have some rights to veto this agreement, although they have authorized the rights of negotiating a free trade agreement to EU, but they still have some important factors to stop this process. We have to look at the situation in EU right now. They are suffering a lot by the inflation. Maybe it is good for certain products supplies, like for some of the raw materials coming from the Mercosur countries, but they will also suffer a lot by the agriculture. So in my understanding, the agriculture power in the French and France and EU are very powerful. So I'm not quite sure about whether they can they can just wait for everything to become the reacting and do not try to go to the street to do some strike.
If we see in the big picture, at a time of rising protectionism and U.S. trade uncertainty, the Mercosur-EU deal is seen as a statement of EU strategic autonomy and a test of U.S. engagement with Latin America. So how does it shift the transatlantic dynamic, and what might it mean for future U.S.-Latin America ties?
I don't think that it is really a big impact to U.S. benefits because the Mercosur's products are not as the same as the United States. So although they may worry about the efforts that EU has put on the negotiation with Mercosur, I don't think that they are the main worry for them to harm the abilities of U.S. products. But in certain degree, I think that there may be some kind of products that, the products from United States will have some competition with Mercosur, like the soybeans, like the beef, and also some of these wineries, like, United States have Napa, and also, for the Mercosur, they have a very good products, especially from certain countries. So United States may be not feel comfortable on the decisions of EU, but I don't think that they will talk too much. And at the same time, they may also require EU to give more offering to the US companies because they said that if you can do that to the South American countries, why can not you give some treatment to U.S. companies? So this statement is really our kind of signal, as I think it's giving United States that the rights of EU and other countries are still there. They want to protect the free trade. That is what they want to give to the U.S. side.
That was Dr. Zhou Mi, Senior Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, speaking with my colleague Gao Yingshi. Coming up, a surge in coffee consumption highlights growing opportunities in China's agricultural imports. This is Road Today. Stay with us. China's coffee boom is doing more than reshaping daily habits. It's quietly rejoining global trade flows. The country's total imports of coffee and related products reached $2 billion in 2025, an increase of 57% year-on-year. Those imports were mainly sourced from Brazil, Ethiopia, Vietnam, Colombia, and other countries. The surge in imports can be attributed partly to rising demand. China's coffee consumption has grown at an average annual rate of more than 15% since 2010, far exceeding the global average of around 2%. For more on this, my colleague Zhao Yang spoke with Li Lun, Assistant Professor of Economics at Peking University.
Professor Li Lun, thank you very much for joining us. China's coffee consumption has been growing at around 15% annually since 2010. So what do you think is really behind the growth of coffee consumption in China?
Yeah, so I think there are at least four reasons behind the growth of coffee consumption. So income growth definitely matters, but it's definitely not the whole story because we have seen that, coffee consumption growth is much faster than income growth. So in proportion, that means everyone is consuming more coffee, no matter what their income is. So we should definitely look beyond income alone. And another reason I think coffee consumption really fits the work pattern and the rhythm of modern life because you could buy a cup of coffee from the subway station to the walk of your office, and when you're in a study session or you're in a meeting, it's very usual to order coffee. So coffee is now part of the daily work routine for a lot of young professionals. And I think the third reason is a lot of Chinese brands are making coffee cheaper and also more accessible. You could buy a cup of coffee in your convenience store downstairs, or you could buy it in Luckin, Coffee Manor, just to name a few Chinese brands. And it's really changing coffee from a premium product to a mass market product. So that's not to mention all of the coupons and all of the the deliveries, which makes coffee available at much lower prices, and it's much comparable to milk tea. And finally, I think the localization and differentiation of products are lowering the entry barrier because coffee, if you take it with, for example, in the form of espresso or black coffee, they could be very bitter. But if we order, let's say, a coconut latte or oat milk latte or fruit flavored coffee, they could be easy to accept especially for China, which has a traditionally tea drinking culture. So overall, I think this coffee boom is reflecting a combination of income growth, lifestyle change, but also digitalization and localization as well.
And it seems that coffee in China is no longer just functional, it's emotional and social. So how important is this lifestyle branding, especially among the young generations, do you think?
Yeah, so I think it's very important because we're not just buying caffeine from a cup of coffee. They're becoming almost like a daily ritual because, a cup of coffee can mean I'm starting my work, or I'm taking a break, or I'm meeting a friend, or I'm team building with other colleagues. So this emotional layer is really giving, brands as well more rooms to differentiate. For example, in different occasions, if you really have a serious meeting, you may order a Americano or black coffee. But if you want to have some team building or connection with your other colleagues, you may order something that's slightly sweeter. And also, I think coffee is a drink that could, easily pair with luxury goods or expensive dining, but it also carries identity signals. For example, it could signify your taste, for example, from the selection of the beans, the location, the source of these beans, and also it could reflect your lifestyle and work style and your preference to the brand, to the design, and also in terms of your social media, you could post for example, a photo of a handmade latte and attract followings. So I think these are all part of the lifestyle branding that's inherently associated with coffee.
And China imported over $2 billion worth of coffee last year. So where did it mainly come from? And beyond coffee, what does this tell us about the future of agriculture imports?
Yeah, so we're seeing, China's import is reaching 2 billion US dollars in 2025 for coffee. And if we look at the destinations, about 25% are from Brazil, and more than 20% are from Ethiopia, and Vietnam, Colombia, Indonesia are some very important, import destinations. And I think coffee is a specific product that has what we call a horizontal differentiation, because beans that's imported from different countries have different taste, have different acidity. So basically, they can serve for different types of consumers. So this is really showing how China's agricultural import are becoming more consumption driven and also more diverse, because we're not just importing soybeans or grain, we're also importing these coffee, which is driven by lifestyle upgrading and also by urban consumption. So this is actually creating a lot of opportunities for developing countries. For example, import in Ethiopia has been increasing quite a lot over the past several years, and this is going to help directly for local coffee farmers.
And the coffee market in China is multifaceted. So how different is it in the first-tier cities like Beishan, Guangsheng, and those smaller cities?
Yeah, so first-tier cities, they're already more mature and the competitive market is already in place. So coffee is already part of our daily urban life. So consumers are familiar with different types of coffee, specialty coffee, and so on. And for lower-tier cities, I think these are cities where the next wave or next trend of income growth or volume growth may come from, because consumers can already buy coffee very conveniently. There are a lot of stores that is available, but I think the familiarity and affordability for local consumers is still yet to be developed, because even a small increase in these per capita consumption for lower tier cities can create a very large market. So, and I think a lot of coffee brands, domestic or foreign, have already realized that. So you could find multiple Starbucks in any second or third tier cities in China, I think very conveniently, and that's reflecting the change in the trend. And finally, I think ordering on your phone, the digitalization and also expansion of these retail chains are also very important in smaller cities. So the consumer doesn't actually need to go to a physical brand to buy a cup of coffee. They could order on their phone, and this is also going to increase the consumption for coffee. And finally, I think it's very important for not only for Beishan, Guangsheng, or for the first-tier cities, because the mass majority of China's coffee consumer is still in second, third, and fourth tier cities. So it's very crucial for these coffee brands to establish a regular, affordable habit for these markets.
That was Li Lun, Assistant Professor of Economics at Peking University, speaking with Zhao Yang. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. I'm Anna in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.